Right before a holiday, it's a great time to take a deep breath, assess where we are with some of our bigger news stories of the year. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to take a look at where we are with the pandemic, and we're going to take a look at where we are with the election. I don't know about you guys, but I can use a deep breath. It's Monday morning. It's just barely after 9 o'clock. And we already have one shattered bottle of green nail polish all over the bathroom floor. Not easy to get up, turns out. Not an easy task. And when I actually went to get my 1-year-old this morning, I came out of his room to find a cheese plate party platter that we bought for Thanksgiving, completely open for breakfast by my 6-year-old and my 4-year-old. So that's what they had for breakfast, the breakfast of champions, balance, a little protein, a little cracker. So that's where I'm at as I start this brand new week. This is actually a pleasure to have a few moments to talk about the news. So let's get into it. Let's talk a little bit about where we are with the pandemic, where we are with the election. So let's start off with COVID-19. As you know, we've been talking a lot about this story, the rise in hospitalizations, the rise in deaths, the rise of positive test cases. But in order to look forward, I really think we need to take a deep breath and look back. We still don't know so much. And when you're reporting out a story, these pillars that hold up the story are really important, and we still don't know a lot of them when it comes to the pandemic. And it's okay to remind ourselves of that. We still don't know where this new coronavirus came from. We think the first outbreak was Wuhan, China, but we haven't pinpointed it ever. We know that people with pre-existing conditions are at higher risk, but that's true of a lot of diseases. We don't know why certain people are so affected and others aren't at all. We know that at this very moment, we focus a lot on hospitalizations and deaths. I mean, this is kind of the tabulation that you're seeing in the news. But we still don't know the long-term impact of this virus as well, and that's going to be another story, kind of a second layer. So we're chasing these numbers on the one hand, but we have all this underneath that we still have left to know. We know this weekend that Pfizer asked for emergency use authorization for the very first vaccine that would be able to be used for COVID-19. We also know as of the beginning of this week that AstraZeneca, that's by the way using a different technology, more, I want to say old-fashioned technology to develop COVID-19 vaccine, looks to be further along with their clinical trials. So it seems that coming to market, we have vaccines coming to market. We also have emergency use authorization application. Actually was approved for an antibody treatment. This is a therapeutic for mild and moderate cases. So this is also something that we're looking at. What are the therapeutics like? So we are seeing more treatments coming to market, but we still have all the mystery about this virus that still is out there. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to cover the fact that we had more than 1 million children test positive for COVID-19 in America, because I didn't realize it was that high, quite frankly. And we're also watching in the weeks after a child gets exposed to COVID-19, whether or not they have a very active infection. There's been this rare syndrome that's come up. We've talked about it, a multi-inflammatory syndrome, a multi-system inflammatory syndrome for children. And so, what is that going to look like? What is that research going to look like in the next several weeks? This is why I wanted to mark it. A lot of you had questions about testing, and it's something that we're still looking into. In fact, there's a new paper out from Harvard looking at tests, and some of these scientists are recommending that what we really need instead of what we're doing right now are less sensitive tests that more accurately understand an active infection where someone's really contagious. The criticism of some of the tests that we're doing right now, the PCR test, is that they're too sensitive, that they may pop positive for someone that is very early on in their infection or may never actually be contagious, or is at the end of their infection. And it's important to know, we generally want to know who's exposed and who has an active infection in America. It's good to know that number, but if someone's not contagious and not a threat necessarily to spreading the illness, then that could help determine public policy better. If we know that there's the group of people that we're really testing are really contagious versus just have a presence of the virus. And that we haven't gotten that specific yet. Now, my husband asked me a question this weekend. He said, well, are we any closer to herd immunity? Because now we've passed 12 million cases of COVID-19 in America. So are we closer to that? And it's a great question. Remember, the CDC thinks that for every one case they identify, there's 10 others that they don't. And they can't tell you whether or not those 10 others are actively super spreaders, spreading the virus all over the place, or whether or not like we were talking about, maybe someone had exposure. But let's just play this out, okay? So let's say there's 12 million cases that we know of in America, test positives, okay? And let's say all of them are positive. I know there's some discrepancies, but let's just give ourselves that. Let's multiply that by 10. We get 120 million people that have been exposed or have carried this virus. That's still around less than 40% of the American population. And what you really need for herd immunity, that this number changes, but roughly 70% of exposure of those have been directly exposed to a virus. So we're not there. It's something just to kind of be aware of. Quick note on the data collection though, if you have any further questions about testing, we'd love to answer them. And it is different. It's really one of the big stories as a journalist looking at this is that we're really seeing that states and local areas not only collect data differently, they're using different tests. It's very difficult to, yes, we can group them into these pots and we can say how many people in America have tested positive, but we're using vastly different tests. There's different resources available. And one of the big stories out of this pandemic is whether or not that's working for us, right? Whether or not having state and local communities with specific strategies versus a broad federal strategy is what we should be doing. And fundamentally, that's a question about America, right? Because really we're a group of United States that are governing locally versus quote unquote big government, a kingdom that's overlooking us, big government healthcare. So that's something, it's just kind of a story to be aware of, and one that's actually sort of interesting to talk about. So let's talk a little bit about the elections now as well. Where are we at with that? Where are we, right? It's such a big question in 2020. So here's what you should know about where we're at with the elections. More states are continuing to certify the results. In fact, Michigan, Pennsylvania are going to do so today. Nevada, Arizona, and Wisconsin, we're going to get this week. What this means is counties are turning in their results, and basically the state board, whatever that state board is saying, okay, these are the official results of this state. And it's not necessarily the end of it, but this is where we get to a very important part of this process. Now, the Trump campaign has continued to say that they have challenges, legal challenges to a variety of different cases and circumstances around the election. What you should know about that is that the Trump campaign, I listened to a 2-hour press conference by the way, just to make sure I had this straight, to understand their point of view. The Trump campaign is basically saying, listen, we're still gathering research. We still have a ways to go. What you're seeing is essentially our opening statement. We're still looking at these results. On the other hand, though, as they're going to courts to ask for these legal challenges to proceed, what's happening across the board in different courts in different states is that there's not enough evidence for these legal challenges to proceed. And that's why you see some of these headlines talking about the Trump campaign this way regarding their legal challenges. So we haven't seen a case rise to a level where there's enough evidence that a judge says, you know what, let's let this case move forward. And that's going to be really important to watch now. Why now? Because as states certify their results, now campaigns can ask or request things of states. For example, the Georgia recount is done, right? They did a the state just said, you know what, we're going to do a recount. We're going to do an audit of our election because it's really, really close. They did it. They certified their results. The Trump campaign had 2 days to say, I'd actually like a recount because this is less than 0.5%. And according to state law, if the difference in election is less than 0.5%, then one campaign can request a recount. So you should know that as the certification process happens in different states, that almost kicks off a window of time for a campaign to further challenge. And so this is why we're just sort of sitting and waiting still to see how this story plays out. I hope that's helpful. So there's been a really wide dismissal of the president's efforts so far, and that's because of what's happening in the courts. But because we have still 2 more weeks really before that deadline, remember that safe harbor deadline where states have to have their results ready to go for it to be considered conclusive. If states do that by early December before the Electoral College votes, there's really nothing that can be done. The results are considered like put a bow on it, it's over. That's what states are trying to get to. In order to get to that point, they have to certify the results and they have to make sure that all the challenges are not going further. So this is why I really have to watch. Any questions for today, you guys, as we move on? I know you've been great. So one of you asking is, did Georgia recount or audit? So Georgia started out the state using the term recount, but then they started to use the term audit. And what the Trump campaign wants Georgia to do at this point is more, it's hard to heavily audit. They want them to check signatures, of which Georgia is saying that they're not able to do according to law. So the words are not interchangeable, but they've been used in a way that's been interchangeable thus far in this story. That said, it's not an audit in which they're like, hey, Jenna Lee, I'm calling you just to double check this has been your vote. They're not doing that. Is any other state in the process of a recount? Not now, but I believe Wisconsin, there was being looked at Wisconsin about whether or not the campaign had officially requested a recount, whether or not that's happening. So I'll look into that today. Any thoughts on this Dominion issue? For those of you who haven't seen this, this has been a question about whether a software being used has in some way changed results or has been a part of interference in the election. So far, we haven't seen evidence of that, but that is something that the Trump campaign has continued to pursue. And are there any things that could happen after the December deadline in regards to litigation? This is an interesting question that I also asked. Can the campaign continue to challenge even after the Electoral College votes? And I mean, there's nothing that keeps you from challenging necessarily if you feel like you have a case. So we just haven't seen anything like that. We haven't really seen anything like that in modern history. And that's really important to note. You might get in a conversation with someone about how the Electoral College works and what this process is like legally and constitutionally what happens if states don't certify their results by a certain date. You should just know there's a lot of debate about how the law works in a period of time where states have not certified their results and there's no conclusive result from a state. Some constitutional scholars think there's a certain process in place. Others think there's another. There is a process in place where it goes to Congress. How it actually works and how it actually plays out, we haven't seen, because we haven't seen Congress get involved in an election since basically 1876, 1877. So just know, I know there's a lot of fighting going on. Like there's a little bit of an unknown. Right now, it looks like states are on track to certify their results. And while legal challenges are going on, we haven't seen them necessarily move through the legal process to actually challenge those results directly in a court of law yet. This is what we're watching. Are we the only country that has a vaccine? That's a great question. I'm gonna have to look into that. Pfizer, I mean, these are global drug makers, so these vaccines would be available to other people. They're not just developed for us, but some of these companies are part of Operation Warp Speed, where it's your taxpayer dollars have invested in these companies with the hope that these vaccines come to market and that they work. And so some of these drug companies took some of our money as an investment to lower their risk to get them moving, to incentivize some of that. Some companies like Pfizer didn't take our money up front, but they did have a promise of a huge customer base. So the government said, hey, okay, you don't want any of our, the company said, you don't want any of the government money, but we'll guarantee a certain amount of doses that the U.S. government will buy from you, which, as any entrepreneur knows, is a great deal. You always want a customer base, right? You want to promise that you can sell your product, and that's essentially what these companies have. Not only do they have government money helping them in the development to lower their risk, they also have a guarantee of a certain audience to sell their product to. That's what Operation Warp Speed is all about. All right, guys, I think that's enough. Talked enough. Hope you're doing great wherever you are. My husband and I, we looked at ourselves the other day, just last night, and said, this is really stressful. I know we're actually all acting like what we're going through is completely normal, right? But we don't really pause to think, what, this is actually really stressful. And while all of us are very blessed, I was thinking about what I was doing on many Thanksgivings back in New York as a young journalist. I was getting up at like 2:00 in the morning, to go into work on Thanksgiving. And so I'm really grateful to be able to do this and pursue my dreams as an entrepreneur, to be able to live in a house. I've never lived in a house before. I always lived in apartments. These are great things. These are great blessings. And we can feel grateful for being blessed and also recognize that this has been a pretty stressful time. And that's part of the reason why I just wanted to talk to you today. I just felt like I needed a cup of coffee with some friends, right? You don't get to do that. So thank you. Thank you for being there for me. I really appreciate it. Questions, comments, let me know. And as always, more on smarternews.com. And I hope you guys have a great day. See you later.